Guys, we're finishing up chapter 1 today. It's like part 1, part 2, and part 3. I know it's a little long-winded. You don't have to watch all the videos, but I encourage you to. So we're going to finish chapter 1 today and get on to chapter 2. We're in the midst of Elizabeth at Pemberley right now, visiting Darcy, and she's quite surprised about his demeanor and the way she's treating her and her aunt and her uncle. So all in a good way. Miss Gardner was standing a little behind, and on her pausing, he asked her if she would do him the honor of introducing him to her friends. This was a stroke of civility for which she was quite unprepared, and she could hardly suppress a smile at his being now seeking the acquaintance of some of those very people, against whom his pride had revolted, in his offer to herself. What will be his surprise, thought she, when he knows who they are? He takes them now for people of fashion. The introduction, however, was immediately made, and it is named their relationship to herself. She stole a sly look at him to see how he bore it, and was not without the expectation of his decamping as fast as he could from such disgraceful companions. That he was surprised by the connection was evident. He sustained it, however, with fortitude, and so far from going away, turned back with them and entered into conversation with Mr. Gardner. Elizabeth could not be but pleased, could not but triumph. It was consoling that he should know she had some relations for whom there was no need to blush. She listened most attentively to all that had passed between them, and gloried in every expression, every sentence of her uncle, which marked his intelligence, his taste, or his good manners. The conversation soon turned upon fishing. She heard Mr. Darcy invite him, with the greatest civility, to fish there as often as he chose, while he continued in the neighborhood, offering at the same point to supply him with fishing tackle, and pointing out those parts of the stream where there was usually most sport. Miss Gardner, who was walking arm in arm with Elizabeth, gave her a look expressive of wonder. Elizabeth said nothing, but it gratified her exceedingly. The compliment must all be for herself. Her astonishment, however, was extreme, and continually was she repeating, "Why is he so altered? From what can it proceed? It cannot be from me. It cannot be for my sake that his manners are thus softened. My reproofs at Hunsford cannot work such a change as this. It is impossible that he could still love me." After walking some time in this way, the two ladies in front, the two gentlemen behind, on resuming their places, after descending to the brink of the river for the better inspection of some curious water plant, there chanced to be a little alteration. It originated in Miss Gardner, who, fatigued by the exercise of the morning, found Elizabeth's arm inadequate to her support, and consequently preferred her husband's. Mr. Darcy took her place by her niece, and they walked on together. After a short silence, the lady first spoke. She wished him to know that she had assured of his absence before she came to the place, and accordingly began by observing that his arrival had been very unexpected. "For your housekeeper," she added, "informed us that you shall not be here till tomorrow, and indeed, before we left Bakewell, we understood that you were not immediately expected in the country." He acknowledged the truth of it all, and said the business with his steward had occasioned his coming forward a few hours before the rest of the party whom he had been traveling. "They will join me early tomorrow morning," he continued, "and among them are who will claim an acquaintance with you, Mr. Bingley and his sisters." Oh my gosh. Elizabeth answered only a slight bow. Her thoughts were instantly driven back to the time when Mr. Bingley's name had been mentioned last between them. As she might judge from his complexion, his mind was not very different engaged. "There is also one other person in the party," he continued after a pause, "who more particularly wishes to be known to you. Will you allow me, or do I ask too much, to introduce my sister to your acquaintance during your stay at Lambton?" The surprise of such an application was great indeed. It was too great for her to know in what manner she acceded to it. She immediately felt that whatever desire Miss Darcy might have of being acquainted with her must be the work of her brother. And without looking further, it was satisfactory. It was gratifying to know that his resentment had not made him think really ill of her. They now walked on in silence, each of them deep in thought. Elizabeth was not comfortable. That was impossible. But she was flattered and pleased. His wishing of introducing his sister to her was a compliment of the highest kind. They soon outstripped the others, and when they reached the carriage, Mr. and Miss Gardner were half a quarter mile behind. He then asked her to walk into the house, but she declared herself not tired, and they stood together on the lawn. At such a time might have been said, and silence was very awkward. She wanted to talk, but there seemed an embargo on every subject. At least she recollected that she had been traveling, and they talked of Matlock and Dovedale with great perseverance. Yet time and her aunt moved slowly, and her patience and her ideas were nearly worn out before the TT was over. What does that mean? Mr. and Mr. Gardner's coming up. They were all passed to go into the house and took some refreshment. This was declined, and they parted on each side with the utmost politeness. Mr. Darcy handed the ladies into the carriage, and when it drove off, Elizabeth saw him walking slowly towards the house. The observations of her uncle and aunt now began, and each of them pronounced him to be infinitely superior to anything they had expected. "He is perfectly well behaved, polite, and unassuming," said her uncle. "There's something a little staely in him, to be sure," replied her aunt, "but it is confined to his air, and is not unbecoming. I can now say with the housekeeper that though some of the people may call him proud, I have seen nothing of it. I was never more surprised than by his behavior to us. It was more than civil, it was really attentive, and there was no necessity for such attention. His acquaintance with Elizabeth was very trifling." "To be sure, Lizzie," said her aunt, "he is not as handsome as Wickham, or rather he is not Wickham's countenance, for his features are perfectly good. But how came you to tell us that he was so disagreeable?" Elizabeth excused herself as well as she could, said that she had liked him better when they met in Kent than before, and she had never seen him so pleasant as this morning. "But perhaps he may be a little whimsical in his civilities," replied her uncle. "Your great men often are, and therefore I shall not take him at his word about fishing, as he might change his mind another day and warn me off his grounds." Elizabeth felt that they had entirely mistaken his character, but said nothing. "From what we've seen of him," continued Miss Gardner, "I really should not have thought that he could have behaved in so cruel a way to anybody, as he has done by poor Wickham. He has not an ill-natured look. On the contrary, there is something pleasing about his mouth when he speaks, and there is something of dignity in his countenance that would not give one unfavorable idea of his heart. But to be sure, the good lady who showed us the house did give him a most flaming character. I could hardly help laughing aloud sometimes, but he is a liberal master, I suppose, and that in every eye of the servant comprehends every virtue." Elizabeth here felt herself on to say something in vindication of his behavior to Wickham, and therefore gave them to understand, in as guarded a manner as she could, that by what she had heard from his relations in Kent, his actions were capable of a very different construction, and that his character was by no means faulty, nor Wickham so amiable, as they had considered in Hertfordshire. In confirmation of this, she related the particulars of all the pecuniary transactions in which they had been connected, without actually naming her authority, but stating it to be such as might be relied on. Miss Gardner was surprised and concerned, but as they were now approaching the scene of her former pleasures, every idea gave way to the charm of recollection. She was too much engaged in pointing out to her husband all the interesting spots in the environs to think of anything else. Fatigued as she had been by the morning walk, they had no sooner dined than she set off in quest for her former acquaintance, and the evening was spent in satisfactions of an intercourse renewed after many years' discontinuance. The occurrences of the day were too full of interest to leave Elizabeth much attention for any of these new friends. She could do nothing but think, and of wonder, of Mr. Darcy's civility, and above all, of his wishing her to be acquainted with his sister. Okay.